Start, yes. Good morning and welcome to the forum at All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church. My name is Spencer Graves. I'm a member of the forum committee. This forum is a platform for the discussion of significant issues, especially those which involve ethical values in the contemporary world. It has been doing this since 1943. Descriptions of nearly all the forums since 2012 are searchable at kkfi.org, and podcasts are available for most of them. We ask the speaker to present for 30 minutes, then we pause to collect donations. This is followed by questions and answer to fill an hour. The program is live streamed on YouTube, where viewers can post questions in the chat, but you need to be logged in to YouTube in order to be able to do so. So, and please, people in the room can please silence your cell phones. Today, Timmon Wallis will explain how the skills devoted to nuclear weapons are needed to combat climate change. Timmon is the director of nuclearban.us. He holds a PhD in peace studies and has been involved in peace building projects in North and South America, Europe, Africa, and Asia. His new book, On Warheads to Windmills, was released only last month. In it, he cites sources that document how the total life cycle cost per megawatt hour of wind and solar is already less than the costs of fossil fuels and nuclear. Moreover, wind and nuclear are new technologies, and their unit costs are still declining relatively rapidly due to what are known as experience curve effects, by which unit costs of almost anything tend to come down roughly at a constant percentage for each doubling of the cumulative production. Fossil fuels currently win in the marketplace because they have substantive control of the media and the political process. That has so far allowed them to keep infant industry subsidies when they should be taxed in proportion to the damage caused by global warming. Nuclear appears cost effective in the market because many of the costs are hidden, buried in the defense budget or the energy or congressional black budget or unfunded insurance costs secured by you and I, our tax dollars. Moreover, Timmon argues that the people currently making nuclear weapons in the US and elsewhere had the skills needed to combat global warming. Instead, they are being used to increase the risks of nuclear Armageddon. So Timmon will talk for roughly a half hour, after which we'll take a collection and then open the floor for questions. Timmon?
Okay, thank you, Spencer. And thanks to those of you who have braved the cold weather. I know it's difficult getting out in the cold, as well as talking about issues that people don't want to talk about, like climate and nuclear war. I mean, these are topics that are difficult to discuss. People have a lot of views about them. Some of them are grounded in fact, and some aren't. So my new book is an attempt to really put all of the facts and figures in one place and make it accessible to people, and provide the primary sources as far as we could, so that you can follow up further to get the information that we need. There's so much misinformation and misunderstanding about these issues. That's the first problem. But and I do want to talk very specifically about Kansas City, because I know that's where you are. I know there's roughly 7,000 people working for the National Security Campus in Kansas City, which is one of the main centers for building and maintaining nuclear weapons in this country. But I want to give a little bit of context first. As Spencer was describing, we're looking at these two existential threats to humanity: climate change, which most people are more familiar with these days, and especially younger people are very concerned about the climate. Um, we're seeing it already, right before our eyes as extreme weather events and so on. But the prospects for survival as a species are pretty grim if we don't really address this at the level that's required. Um, the Biden administration, as you all know, passed a historic bill 2 years ago now, the Inflation Reduction Act, and they've done some other things to make a start. That alone was the biggest investment in clean energy ever in the U.S., but it's still a drop in the bucket, literally. And we've got to talk about what else is needed to actually get us to where we need to be to save the planet from climate catastrophe. And of course, nuclear weapons have been with us for 75 years now, or uh, can't keep track of the year now. It's 2024, isn't it? But people have forgotten about the danger and the risk that these weapons carry. And every year that goes by, that risk actually increases. It doesn't decrease; it increases. And we were just talking before this program about the recent article in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. As you probably all know, there's a doomsday clock, which the nuclear scientists put out every year. It's not as scientific as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they've got very hard figures that are collected from all around the world. The nuclear scientists have to rely on judgment call as to how much the risk is to the planet from a possible nuclear war, whether on purpose or by accident. And they've been putting out this clock every year. During the Cold War, it varied from 3 minutes to 12 minutes to midnight. Um, Depending on the relations between the two superpowers and the issues that were going on at the time. As you probably all know, it's now closer to midnight than it was ever during the Cold War, and we've got a new clock being revealed next week. So we'll see, but I'm very doubtful that it's going to go further away from midnight. If we're facing such huge, dangerous situations with breakdown of relations, the breakdown of treaties, the wars, hot wars that are going on, not just in Ukraine, but now with Gaza and the potential for that spreading to other parts of the Middle East. I mean, we're in a very dangerous situation. There's no doubt about that. But there is hope, and my book is called "Preventing Climate Catastrophe and Nuclear War" because we have the we have the answers to get out of this. We simply do. And the reason that we're not uh, was alluded to by Spencer just now. We've got companies like Honeywell International, for example, making billions and billions of dollars on uh, these programs, whether it's nuclear weapons contracts or whether it's fossil fuel subsidies. I mean, these huge companies make a lot of money out of these problems, and they use some of that money, a tiny fraction of that money, to lobby Congress to literally bribe them with re-election finance that they need to get re-elected, with advice and reports and think tanks to sort of prop up their own positions. I mean, we're in a very, very um, corrupt political system, which is run by these companies, and that's why we have nuclear weapons. There's no other reason. I mean, the many other people have documented, the errors in deterrence thinking and the misunderstandings about the whole, uh, nuclear weapons program. Uh, Opinion polls have continuously shown that people don't want nuclear weapons. They want a world without nuclear weapons, as many presidents have promised, including the present one. I mean, the United States is legally committed to eliminating its nuclear weapons under the Non-Proliferation Treaty from 1968. And they promised to negotiate in good faith and at an early date, and that's over 50 years ago. So the world is waiting. We don't want to wait for an accident or a nuclear war before we get rid of these weapons. I mean, we've just got to do it. So that brings us to the question of jobs. Um, as I said, there's some of you may directly work for the Honeywell, the National Security um, campus. There's about 7,000 people there. Altogether, around the country, there's about 140,000 people working directly on nuclear weapons for private companies and for some of these national security labs and so on at Los Alamos and so on. Now, that's a lot of people, and they all have families and they have communities that depend on the families, and and there's suppliers and people who make nuts and bolts who supply them and so on. So it's a lot of people. It's absolutely nothing compared to the country as a whole. We have approximately 165 million employees working in this country. So 140,000 is less than um,
Less than
what
half of a
less than half of half a percent. Yeah. Um, but um, but nevertheless, these are people that are that have jobs, and we care about them. And same with the fossil fuel industry. I mean, there's more than a million working directly on fossil fuel extraction and so on, and many, many millions more in the automotive industries and so on. But we need to move towards a green, clean economy. I mean, we have to save the planet from climate. It's not whether we will survive or not. We have to. I mean, that's our responsibility as a species, let alone as a country. Um, and so, the move, as Spencer also pointed out, the costs of wind power is already less than any other source of energy for making electricity. And I know you're technically in Missouri, but because your city is called Kansas, I want I want to mention Kansas because Kansas actually has second most wind resources in the entire country after Texas. I mean, Kansas has a lot of wind. I haven't lived there. I presume you can vouch for that. But I mean, they've estimated that Kansas alone could be producing as much wind energy as the entire country is using right now from electricity from all other sources. So we just need to develop those uh, um, resources. Um, I did the Warheads to Windmills book I'll just show you again in case you want to order it from your local bookshop. But this is the third iteration of this report, which got longer and longer because we want to have the details and make sure people have the sources to go to if they want to. But it started out as a report in 2019, and it was based on a UK report, which I knew about, back in I guess it was the 1990s. I mean, it wasn't, or no, 2000, I think maybe 2006 or something. Anyway, it was a few years ago. A report came out called Arms to Renewables. And it was a very detailed study of not just nuclear weapons, but in fact, the armament uh, factories in the UK, in England, mostly, and how many workers were working there, what kinds of skills they employed, and what was needed to move the UK to a green economy, to wind and solar, and in this case, um, tidal power. So this study showed that there were several thousand workers in the north of England at a place called Barrow-in-Furness working on building nuclear submarines. I mean, nuclear missile submarines, Trident submarines. And those exact same people in the exact same place could be building the largest tidal barrage in the world across the bay, the Morecambe Bay there. And and this report showed that the people had the skills needed to work on this, the marine engineering, basically working on submarines. They could be working on turbines instead for this tidal project. They wouldn't even have to move home, and they wouldn't be earning less money. There's, they worked it all out in great detail, and I said, well, why don't we have that something like that here in the U.S.? And I couldn't find anything, so I started working on it, and we're just a drop in the bucket in terms of what could be done in terms of research on the actual jobs, for instance, at the National Security Campus. But I have done a lot of research on this, and if you just Google I mean, if any of you here are looking for work, you may have already Googled jobs in Kansas City, and you'll find a lot of them at the National Security Campus. And if you look and what the requirements are for those jobs, I mean, 99 out of 100 of them are looking for the same skills that we need to build the green economy. And I'm just going to show you if I can find the right page. So, here's a map of all the different nuclear weapons jobs that are currently being employed in the U.S. And here's where the jobs that they could be working on to make electric vehicles, batteries, solar power, wind power, and so on. This chart here. So if you buy a copy of the book or get it from your library, it's page 263. There's a chart which says, examples of job descriptions for jobs that are being hired right now in Kansas City National Security Campus and other nuclear weapons places. For instance, a nuclear weapons security network implementation engineer. Well, as it says, it's an engineering position. The requirement is a BA in electrical or electronic engineering and some experience and so on. And the same requirement of engineering is also needed for wind turbine generator engineers, offshore wind engineering analyst, wind fleet engineer, electrical engineer, solar. I looked again at some jobs in the so I mentioned, submarines. So we've got nuclear propulsion engineer, nuclear engineer for the Navy, and so on. And that requires a BA in marine engineering or naval architecture. And again, those same job requirements are needed for wind project manager, marine system engineer, wave and tidal systems designer, coastal engineer title, and so on and so on. We've looked at the exact same skills. I mean, obviously, there's one option to retrain people and who are currently making nuclear weapons and give them other skills to work in other areas. There's also, you know, many other options, including, I mentioned there's 143,000 people working on nuclear weapons in this country. Well, if you gave every single one of them $1 million, you'd still have billions left over if you stop making nuclear weapons. I mean, there's lots of options here, but the skills that we need. So again, for solving the nuclear weapons crisis, we just got to stop making nuclear weapons and get the other countries to do the same. And it's not as difficult as it sounds. It's the companies that are in the way of doing that. But there's nothing stopping us from just saying no. We don't want these anymore. They don't protect us. They just make the world less safe, not more safe. But when it comes to climate, we still have work to do. And that's why we need these people. It's not just, let's find them a job and throw them a biscuit. It's actually, we need these skills to save the planet from climate catastrophe. And not only engineers, for example, that I was just listing, for building projects that we already know about, but as we all know, the to move to electric vehicles when we have electric vehicles already on the road, but we need more advances in batteries, especially for electric flight. I mean, there are already planes, not big ones, but small planes, nine-seaters, that are flying now with electric motors run by batteries. They don't go very far, but they already exist, and we need to develop those technologies urgently. I mean, we need batteries that can take aviation many steps forward. We need batteries to store the electricity that's we all know that the sun doesn't shine every day and the wind doesn't blow every day. So, we need battery storage for that. We need other technologies. We need to develop much more small scale wind resources, for example, because these gigantic turbines are great for harnessing the wind, on a large scale. But if we want to get every household, every farm, every school and hospital producing their own electricity. We've got to develop a lot more capacity for smaller scale uh, wind projects, for other kinds of solar and as I mentioned, this tidal power. There's estimates that if we developed tidal and wave power, we could generate electricity, unlimited amounts of electricity. Never mind nuclear fusion and all these pipe dreams that are decades away. We could do this right now if we wanted to. But we need the engineers, we need the technicians, we need the workers out there building these things. Already, wind turbine engineers are the fastest growing job uh, category in the country because they're building these things. They're offshore wind, floating wind turbines. There's all kinds of projects, and so that's the world that we're moving towards, and that we need to move towards, and we just need to speed this up. We need the government doing this. We need incentives. Spencer mentioned the fossil fuel subsidies. That's nothing compared to the money pouring into the nuclear weapons business. I mean, these are both trillion-dollar businesses that need to stop. Simple as that. We have to move away from these, and we've got treaties that are. I mean, the nuclear ban treaty that Spencer mentioned is already in existence. There's already 69 countries that are committed to it, and Honeywell, for example, is already breaking the law in some of these other countries. I mean, Mexico has a big Honeywell operation there. Mexico is a leader in the nuclear ban treaty. Haven't yet outlawed Honeywell from Mexico, but I mean, these companies are facing legislative risk in these other countries. Ireland, which is another pioneer in the nuclear ban treaty, has already passed a law which makes it illegal to have anything to do with nuclear weapons in Ireland, and the penalty is up to life in prison. So, um, the CEO of Honeywell, Darius Adamczyk, I think he might have retired or is about to retire. But I mean, if he wants to go play golf in Ireland, he's risking life in prison. As a CEO of a company that makes nuclear weapons. So this is where the world is going, and we've got to go with it. And we need to make these changes. Um, and we need governments behind us for this. We don't have the Biden administration yet. We're working on bills in Congress. We've got some members of Congress on board. We've got states with resolutions and legislation. We've got loads of cities. I don't remember if Kansas City has passed any resolutions like the Back from the Brink or so on, but we have cities like New York City who have committed to divesting billions of pension funds from the nuclear weapons companies. We have a number of cities that have already done that and more on their way. And this is going to, you know, it's a wake up call for Honeywell and other companies that, their days are numbered if they don't move out of the nuclear weapons business and go back to making thermostats. So I've got 5 more minutes. There's so many more things to talk about, but I thought I would just quickly address the nuclear power question because that always comes up, and it was mentioned at the beginning. Nuclear power. I mean, one of the obvious things that people think about when they think about converting nuclear weapons companies and facilities to green energy, they think, oh well, we've got nuclear power. We just move the nuclear engineers to the nuclear power plants and make lots more nuclear power plants. Well, I have a whole section devoted in the book to why this is not the answer to climate, um, for a number of reasons. I just list four of them, but the first is the waste issue, and although nuclear power plants do not produce carbon directly, I mean they're certainly implicated in the whole fuel cycle. But I just want to read you one quote from my book, so you get a flavor of the book. Um, and this really is the nutshell of why I personally uh, argue against nuclear power as a solution to the climate crisis, and that is this. If there is one overriding lesson to be learnt from the climate crisis, it is that we cannot produce things of value to society without also paying attention to the waste products we create in the process. Ironically, carbon dioxide is one of the least toxic of all the many waste products created by modern industry. The most toxic of them all is the high level radioactive waste from nuclear power plants. And that is, in a nutshell, why we've got to think very carefully about nuclear power. We're creating waste that we don't know yet what to do with, um, will remain radioactive and lethal to humans for literally hundreds of thousands of years. We haven't even got history going back more than 6,000, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of years when we don't know what language people will speak, or anything. And to keep it out of sight, out of view, and safely protected. I mean, we can't even protect a nuclear power plant in Ukraine, which turns out to suddenly be in the middle of a war zone. This is a crazy, crazy approach to trying to create energy. We've just got to stop burning fossil fuels, and we've got to stop uh, playing around with uranium, and we've got to put it back in the ground and leave it, and move on. Um, there are many other reasons why nuclear power is not a solution. A second one is that it takes so long to design and get approval and then build nuclear power plants. The only nuclear power plant that's open in this country in the last 20 years is one in Georgia, and it took 20 years for them to from scratch to actually operating that power plant. And we don't have that kind of time. We have to be working now on solving the climate crisis and moving away from fossil fuels. So the time factor is another one. The third one is that uranium is is not a fact. The irony of nuclear power is that we're running out of uranium. I mean, there's still lots of uranium in the ground, but the longer we mine it, I'm trying to struggling for the words here. It's the less concentrated it is. The more the best uranium has already been mined, so it gets less and less concentrated, and you have to refine it. Now, people don't realize this, but refining uranium to the point where you can use it for nuclear power, let alone for nuclear weapons, which takes a lot more refining, this is a hugely energy intensive process. A lot of our uranium comes from Australia, and the single largest consumer of electricity in Australia is a uranium enrichment plant. It takes huge amounts of electricity just to refine the uranium to use it in a nuclear power plant. And there's a thing called the energy cliff, which um, compares the amount of electricity it takes to refine the uranium compared to the amount you'll ever get out of it from a nuclear power plant. And at some point, and we're reaching that point quite soon, the amount of electricity it takes to refine the uranium is more than you'll ever get out of that uranium from a nuclear power plant. So it's crazy. It's just it's not producing electricity; it's consuming electricity. And then the final point that I make in the book is about cost, as Spencer said. The cost of nuclear power is already higher than any other source of electricity. So to think that we're going to somehow move to nuclear power to solve all our electricity problems is crazy. And in fact, even that cost is heavily, heavily subsidized. If the government of the United States did not subsidize the insurance for nuclear weapons for nuclear power plants, there would be no nuclear power plants now. They would all shut down because they can't afford the insurance required for any kind of accident, let alone something like Fukushima or Chernobyl or something. So that's the story that I have about nuclear power. I'm happy to take questions. I'm sure you have a few. And first, I guess they want to move on to the
Yeah,
hazard
begging for money. I'm wondering if I can
Thank you
get
for money.
someone
Okay.
in the audience to come up and pick up that the basket up there and bring it up here so I can uh, demonstrate the desired behavior. Um, so people in the room are invited to come up. If you have questions, here on my um, my right, I guess. Uh, and um, and George Baggett is on the phone or on the Zoom call, and so he can ask questions. I guess I don't. His I don't see him on the thing, but I yeah, so he's hidden. So, but I don't know when.
I'm here.
Okay, so do you have any questions, George?
Well, you have somebody in the room, but I have a few things that are, there's no, but so far there's not a whole lot of, well, there's one comment, I'm
Okay,
sorry.
great. Well, why don't we,
The, but as I was listening to this, Mr. Timmons,
Timmon Wallis,
um,
Dr.
the
Wallis.
Dr. Wallace, I have a, would you comment on the idea that the corporations that are running the show that you're just discussing, especially Honeywell and like other DOE contractors, there's a corporate language issue that they face, and there's a book by Catherine Rudy Herringen. It's called Declining Demand, Divestiture, and Corporate Strategy, and it's all about in-game planning. And I I'm wondering about because these corporations have a difficulty in communicating the idea of changing the direction of their actions. So they suffer from what they call psychologically negative transfer. They don't want it. They do not want to. So would you discuss the idea of the kind of corporate language required for in-game planning for the companies involved in the destruction or use of all these nuclear issues that you discussed?
Well, I do have a PhD, but I don't understand any of the words that you're using. I mean, can you explain what you mean by in-game planning? What is it?
Well, it's when the corporation realizes the direction they're going. Examples of the in-game planning for the acetylene industry, in-game planning for the rayon industry, in-game and baby foods industry, when they're making products that are no longer are not going to be sustainable in the long term.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, especially
So they
fossil
have to
fuels, right? What are the fossil fuel companies going to do after we do
that's
away
right.
with fossil fuels?
But I think that it's a communication issue with them, is that they need to have that language explained or be start taking up that kind of language.
But it's not just communication, it's
Uh,
real. What are they going to do? They have to
Yeah, I mean,
migrate to some other something else.
I mean, there's a lot of greenwashing going on, for example, I mean, when you talk about communication, all the companies, including the fossil fuel companies, are facing public displeasure at their behavior and their priorities, and they're all trying to communicate that they're about moving to green this and green that, and so I'm not quite clear. I mean but that's just another form of obfuscation and uh, trying to confuse people about what they're really doing because they're not really changing their behavior. I mean, um, interestingly, I mean, I can talk about what happened in the 1980s because I did do my PhD research on this actually. In the 1980s, at the height of the Cold War, um, we had companies like Ford Motor Company, General Electric, Westinghouse. They were all making nuclear weapons, all of them. Morton Salt Company, and they suddenly found themselves faced with huge public pressure, including boycotts, like you mentioned, with the baby formula and so on. Um, and many of them pulled out completely from the nuclear weapons business. They simply don't, they didn't like it was a small percentage of their overall business, and they didn't like that kind of public pressure, and so they pulled out very publicly. I mean, Morton Salt faced a boycott of salt. I mean, it was Morton Tycol was the company. They sold the Tycol to another company which still makes rocket engines, but I mean Morton does not anymore. Um, Ford Motor Company sued Marin County in California over their campaign to boycott Ford Motor Company, and they tried to say that it didn't have anything to do with nuclear weapons, and they lost in court over that. And General Electric, which faced probably the biggest campaign because people said, we're not going to buy your light bulbs all across the country. This was in the late 1980s or around 86, 87. And General Electric, quite publicly pulled out of the nuclear weapons business. And if you go on their website right now and Google nuclear weapons, you will find a web page under General Electric saying we don't have anything to do with nuclear weapons. We're good. Leave us alone. We're a good company. And we've already seen that starting to happen now in the nuclear weapons industry. Two companies have pulled out. I mean, we don't know, I mean, there's always mergers going on and other things. But ACOM, which is a very large, uh, you know, con general contractor, builds all kinds of, roads and airports and so on, and hospitals. They had contracts with the nuclear weapons business, and they pulled out. Another one in England, Serco, has pulled out, and they actually did say very publicly that they don't want to have anything to do with nuclear weapons. So those are the kinds of practical things. Um, and I talked about the jobs, but there's another piece of this which I didn't mention, which is that we will need certain proportion of these companies and the workers who know about nuclear weapons for the indefinite future to actually dismantle and monitor and make sure we don't ever have nuclear weapons again, and make sure that the ones that exist are safely dismantled. So there's that side of it. But I can't really. I'm sorry, I can't really comment on the psychology of it. That's not my area.
Mhm.
The
We
sort of
have some other YouTube questions here, but
okay, great.
No, go ahead with
Okay.
the YouTube questions.
yeah, well, Alex is asking, what action would you recommend we commoners should take that would have the most impact?
Okay, well, that's a question I can answer. We have a Warheads to Windmills campaign, and you can go to our website, warheadstowindmills.org, to see what we're up to. I mean, we're trying to get people to write letters. First of all, it's a very easy thing to do, but it does make a difference. I mean, the members of Congress, we have support in Congress, but it's very small, and they need to hear from their own constituents. So I don't know who your members of Congress are uh, in that area offhand, but I mean, they need to hear from you. They need to hear that we've got to move away from fossil fuels and nuclear weapons, and there's no time to waste on this. We got to move, and we need to build support for that. So there's bills in the Congress. There's bills in as I said, in some states. Um, there's also work at the city level to get resolutions passed, or I don't know if you know any of your city councilors or mayor or whatever. There's actually Des Moines, Iowa is the center. The mayor of Des Moines, Iowa, is the president of the Mayors for Peace, which has over 200 cities in the U.S. and thousands across the world who are in solidarity with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, saying, we don't want any city ever again to face this terrible catastrophe. So we're committed to a world without nuclear weapons, and you could get Kansas City on that if they're not already. Um, Other towns and then, as I said, our big emphasis as a campaign is focused on these companies because churches have investments in these companies, schools, colleges, um, pension funds, banks. Every single person on this call is connected with something that has an investment in one of these companies, and we've got to work on divestment, and we've got to work on pressure, bigger forms of pressure, like I said, boycotts. So Honeywell, as an example, used to make thermostats, and probably everyone on this call has a Honeywell thermostat. We do. We started a campaign to write to Honeywell saying, we're not going to buy your thermostats anymore if you keep making nuclear weapons. And instead of pulling out of the nuclear weapons business, they sold their thermostat division, which is not what we wanted, but it shows you the kind of impact that citizens can have. But they do, so they don't make thermostats, but they do make lots of other things, including medical equipment for hospitals. And there's, doctors are a key constituency for, and medical staff, very key for the nuclear and the climate issue, because they know the dangers that we face, and they want to. So I mean, working with your local hospital to make sure they don't buy equipment from Honeywell. Honeywell also makes muck boots and other kinds of products, safety goggles and things like that. So I mean, there's ways of boycotting or putting pressure on them. But I'll let you move on to other questions. Thanks.
We have another one, Richard Thompson. How can we frame renewable resources with language to make them more attractive to voters, calling them green jobs, etc.?
How can we frame renewable resources to make them more attractive? Well, I mean, we're talking about our survival, and we're talking about our children and our grandchildren and what kind of future they have. I mean, I don't know how much more to say to voters. I mean, it's this is not just like a choice. Do we want to keep burning up the planet or not? Um, there's a lot of education to do, and that's why I wrote a whole book. Because it's hard to explain these things um, in a sound bite to people, but I mean, they're cheaper for one thing. I mean, in terms of attracting voters, why don't we just say let's move to an economy where there's more jobs and electricity is cheaper? How's that?
Good point. Good point. This is another question is from Tommy. I'm not sure the name. Why use the Department of War double talk, National Security Campus? Can we just call it the Kansas City Atom Bomb Factory?
Well, that is a good point. I mean, there's this I mentioned the greenwashing. I mean, it's all the same thing. Department of Defense, national security. I mean, these are weapons of mass destruction. So even an atom bomb factory doesn't really convey, the fact that we're talking about mass destruction of human beings, of civilians, of cities, and it's closer to Auschwitz than to an innocuous factory making making rifles or something. We're talking about um, mass murder. That's what we're talking about. So I don't know how you put a polite edge on that, but I agree. I mean, let's start talking about what it really is.
Well, one of the things that occurred to me as I'm listening to you today is that the Department of Energy had what they called a reconfiguration years back, and you may be familiar with it, where like Paducah facilities and some of the environmental cleanup facilities had to reconfigure, like Hanford, no longer making anything but doing cleanup. And the same companies that were involved in making the mess have contributed a great deal to taking on that cleanup process. And they're making tremendous amounts of money on it. And they're doing some interesting work. And so I'm wondering if in a way what you're guiding toward or suggesting is that they're going to want to take this on. They're gonna they I think we need to that was the point of my in-game strategy and divestiture comment, the
Yeah,
question.
yeah, yeah,
So what do you I think because I don't think the average guy in Kansas City or anywhere is going to start taking on building carbon black facilities for making batteries. Um, there's a whole bunch of technical issues associated with it, and like you said, these companies know how to do these jobs. So we need to your point is well taken, but I think I think that's where it's going to go. We're going to see these companies suddenly wake up
yeah.
and decide to do so. And
Well,
would you comment further on that?
Yeah, I mean, we talk as a campaign about, putting pressure on the companies, stigmatizing nuclear weapons, trying to force them because they're very powerful. I mean, these are trillion-dollar industries. But at the same time, what we're actually trying to do is convince them that it's in their interest if they want to continue making a profit and continue, good jobs with good benefits and so on. They've got to move out of these industries that are killing the planet. And with the fossil fuel industry, I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of stranded assets, which means that these companies, the value of these companies is going to go down to worthless because they're based on the value of the oil that's still in the ground, which they're going to be able to sell at some point. And if they can't sell it, then their company is suddenly worthless. Now the same applies to nuclear weapons. If the if the rest of the world continues to join this treaty and make everything to do with nuclear weapons illegal, including financing them, then these companies are facing not only the sort of reputational risk, but they're facing legislative risk. In other words, they're potentially engaging in illegal activities abroad, and those activities could carry costs, and all of these costs, do add up to a company's, market capitaliz- capitalization. The value is based on all kinds of intangible factors, which they got to take into consideration. And so it's in their interest to move out of this industry and and be developing other things, which, as I said, many of them already do other work. They just have to, do some switching. Um, I mean, we're targeting Airbus at the moment in Europe, which is one of there's only two companies left in the world that make passenger planes, Airbus and Boeing. Boeing's in huge trouble right now, but Airbus gets only less than 5% of their income from building nuclear weapons for the French nuclear arsenal. And so, they're under huge pressure all across Europe because, Europeans are very much opposed to nuclear weapons in general. And they're facing this pressure like, you could just stop making the nuclear weapons and keep on making passenger planes and you're going to overtake Boeing. Then it's a very sophisticated business case, for these companies to make this move.
Talk.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else, George?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So, talk about the role of the media in sustaining the failure of the media to properly communicate the case that you've made. Uh, th- right.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm going to show you another chart from the book because I really want you to buy the book. Um, but somewhere in here we have, oh yeah, here it is. So this is a chart that we have in the book, which shows the why. I mean, sorry, here. I
Go
don't know if
ahead.
you can see. Is it backwards or is it?
No, it's fine. Yeah.
I mean, this is an attempt to just describe the congressional corporate media think tank complex, that President Eisenhower warned about when he said, don't let the military industrial complex run the business of the military. And we now have this complex that not only includes the military industries and Congress, but it also includes the media and these think tanks and academics and so on, who are all part of this system to maintain the status quo. And it's driven by money. So, we have these super PACs and so on, and dark money that corporations put into the media to advertise and to influence the editorial policies and so on. We have all these think tanks that are producing supposedly, you know, neutral or academic or scholarly reports that say, oh well, we got to keep nuclear weapons and we got to keep fossil fuels. That's all money pouring into to make that happen, and we don't have that kind of money and that kind of access to the media. So it's a huge challenge. um, we're I mean, one of the other reasons for writing a book is not just for people to read it, but because it's one of the few excuses I get to actually get some interest and get on the radio and so on. Because you need ways of reaching out. Local media is hugely important for this because it's easier to reach and people listen, to local radio and so on. Local newspapers, you can get letters to the editor, but it's a huge challenge, and I'm sure you could say more, Spencer.
Okay, George, any other questions?
No, go ahead. You were
National security taxes are allowed under U.S. law and the World Trade Organization. Is there my thought about the members of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons can start um, taxing trade with companies and nations involved with that have nuclear weapons, and just gradually increase those until they're completely disconnected from anybody that has anything to do with nuclear weapons. Your comment.
Yeah, well, that's a great idea. I mean, part of the reality of the world trade, you know, the world system is that the US is still, hugely powerful in terms of its influence on the dollar as a trading mechanism and so on. And all countries, including our adversaries, are wary of you know being cut off from U.S. trade, basically. And so the countries that have already signed on to the nuclear ban treaty, for example, I mentioned Ireland. They're totally on board to do what they can to put pressure on the companies that are making nuclear weapons, but they're very hesitant to sort of get on the wrong side of U.S. government as such. So, it's a hard project. We're working on it. I mean, we just had the second meeting of the treaty in New York just a couple months ago, and my own, I mean, our Warheads to Windmills coalition, actually, our goal there was to try to push more of the countries that are in the treaty to do what Ireland's already done with the law that makes it, not only illegal but puts a really heavy penalty for having any connections to nuclear weapons. And if more countries do that, that would start to make more of a difference. And the more countries that join the treaty and the more pressure they put, the more we will have this pressure building on U.S. companies. And our strategy overall to get rid of nuclear weapons is a sort of pincer movement from countries outside the United States who signed this treaty and enact legislation to put pressure on these companies, and pressure from inside the U.S. Through divestment and boycotts, and cities and faith communities, and universities getting involved in pressuring these companies. If they feel the pressure from inside and from outside, I think that's going to be enough to really shift things.
And George, do you have another
um,
question?
I was real intrigued with your comment about the shortage of uranium, and that for years I've been a student of what you're talking about. Actually, you may have been able to tell that. The point is that I think our children are going to be great children are going to be embarrassed for us for having wasted this resource. And that would you comment more about the potential scarcity in the long run for the use of uranium, and we have many people that know about nuclear medicine and the like. Um, will we really come up to a shortage of this material for the beneficial use of mankind?
Well, that's a great question, and it's similar to the question about fossil fuels, actually, because um, we've got to stop burning fossil fuel, because for no other reason than we need the remaining fossil fuels for not only medicines. I mean, fossil fuels, are used for all kinds of things, paints and
Plastics.
lubricants, all kinds of things that we need. that don't involve burning it and using it up. And the same with uranium and other resources. I mean, there are uses, important uses of uh, I mean, I don't know that much about radioactive medicine, but there are uses. I don't know where the different kinds of thorium and so on. They but they those resources are needed in the longer term for other uses that are important. And if we just burn it up, I mean, the problem with uranium and with nuclear power is, as I'm sure you know, is that they refine it and refine it and refine it to get this material that is highly radioactive, not too radioactive for use in the power plant, and then they put it in there um, to heat up. You put them together and they get very, very hot, and that boils water and that makes electricity. However, as you put them together and they heat up, they also decay into all these other materials like plutonium, which they use for nuclear weapons, but all kinds of other highly, highly radioactive materials, which are then, it's kind of polluted, it's wasted, it's all. I mean, in the future, they might want to extract the uranium back out again somehow, or do other things with it. But it's you know both burning of fossil fuels and burning up of uranium in the long term for the humanity is wasting these really important resources. I think that's what you were getting at. Yeah, Spencer.
Okay, do you have another question, George, or I'll go to the
No, go
next?
ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so how is climate change an existential risk? I know that it's serious, but I don't see how it's existential like nuclear weapons. If we get a nuclear war between the U.S. and Russia, simulation estimates that something like 99% of the northern hemisphere will starve to death if they do not, people will starve to death if they do not die of something else sooner. Worldwide, it's over 80% and over 90% of the fatalities will be in countries not involved in the nuclear exchange. So, but how is climate change an existential risk?
Well, that's a good question. It's not chapter one is an introduction, but chapter two is exactly that question. Why isn't climate change an existential risk? And it's not an instant risk in the way that nuclear war would be. Um, but if we look at the longer term, and it's hard to do this because most of the research and most of the reporting that's done on climate is only looking at this century. So, for example, there are estimates from the IPCC as to how much sea level rise would occur between now and 2100 if we don't bring the carbon emissions down to a certain level, which we're nowhere near at the moment. So we're talking about centimeters, 1 foot, 2 feet, maybe 3 feet of sea level rise, which will inundate entire countries like Tuvalu and Vanuatu in the Pacific, and it will cause huge damage to places like the east coast of Florida and the coastal area of Bangladesh, where there's more than 100 million people will be affected. But it's not the end of the world, as you say. However, we are on track, I'm afraid to say, if we don't deal with this much more urgently than we are on track for major tipping points in the global ecosystem. Like, for example, the melting of the polar ice caps. Now, this is not going to happen between now and 2021. So, we're talking longer term, but we're talking about things that set in motion, and we're not going to be able to stop them. And if the polar ice caps melt, we're talking about sea level rise of not 3 feet, but 200 feet. And that not only means huge, most of the world's cities are within 200 feet of the sea, but also, it affects the climate in terms of growing of crops. It's going to cause massive famine, huge, huge amounts of migration like we've never seen in history. I mean, we've got 100 million um, refugees at the moment, but we're talking about billions of people on the move. And, Bill McKibben, for example, says, climate is an existential threat because ultimately it's going to lead to nuclear war
Yeah.
because of all the upheaval this is going to create. But it could also kill us purely from the 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 death of the ecosystem and the fact that we can't grow food and things like
And
that.
we are out of time. Just a reminder, each week's program is broadcasted on KKFI roughly 1.5 weeks later. This presentation will likely air a week from Tuesday, which will be January 23rd at 7 to 8 p.m. on Central Time on 90.1 FM, or you can go to kkfi.org and click listen at that time. If you want to share this with others, you can invite them to search for the forum at All Souls Church YouTube channel at allsoulskc.org, or afternoon January 23rd by going to kkfi.org, then News and Public Affairs, then All Souls Forum, and you can find this episode there. Next week, the Director of Public Safety for Kansas City, Missouri, Johnson, will describe how the city is collaborating with a number of other organizations to reduce violent crime to make Kansas City, Missouri safer in 2024 than in the recent past. And now you are all invited to stay for the regular services, which begins in the Bragg Auditorium down the hall at 10:45, or via All Souls UU Church YouTube channel at allsoulskc.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Timmon.